My name is Daniel Foch. I am a real estate broker and investor.
And my name is Nick Hill. I am a mortgage broker and investor. And today we are going to explore the world of zoning and try to shed some light on some often overlooked and forgotten wisdom. So let's start this story in the most sensible place, the beginning. We'll go back as far as we can to look at a brief history of zonings because the origins of zoning districts can be traced all the way back to antiquity.
The ancient walled city was a precursor of modern land classification and regulation. Outside the city walls lay undesirable functions, typically those producing noise and odors. The space between the walls housed unsanitary and dangerous activities like butchering, waste disposal, and brick firing. Within the walls stood civic and religious buildings, as well as the residences of most citizens.
Now, many ancient cities further started to classify these land types and uses within those said walls. This practice was widespread across various regions of the world, and some examples include China during the Zhou dynasty back in 1046 all the way to 256 BC. In India during the Vedic era from 1500 to 500 BC, and the military camps that proliferated through the Roman Empire all the way back 31 BC to 476 AD. So, a couple of years ago, I guess you could say.
During the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, cultural and socio-economic shifts triggered a surge in urban regulations. These changes stemmed from new scientific thinking, the advent of mass production and complex manufacturing, and rapid urbanization. And as industry relocated from homes, it transformed modern cities. The evolving relationship between home and work resulted in a more diverse mix of uses within residential areas.
Now, let's fast forward to America in the early 1900s, where the first modern zoning systems were implemented. The United States saw pioneering examples with Los Angeles during ordinances of 1904 and New York City with zoning resolutions in about 1916.
So now that we took a trip through time, let's provide some modern context now on what is zoning and how it works.
So, Dan, as you had mentioned, zoning is the process of dividing land into various categories based on specific uses. Now, these categories usually include residential, commercial, industrial, as well as agricultural zones. Zoning laws dictate what activities are allowed in each zone and prescribe what type of buildings and structures are permitted there as well.
Zoning also outlines the allowable density, building height, and setbacks in the zones. So essentially, how big your structure can be and how many units you can put within it, or how much square footage of the use it can include for industrial and commercial applications. Different levels of government regulate zoning in Canada, including municipal, provincial, and federal. Each level of government has different responsibilities and rules in the zoning process.
Now, here in Canada, zoning is governed on both local and federal levels, with provinces having jurisdiction over most of the regulations. Provincial governments often issue permits for different land uses based on the purpose of each region. For example, certain areas may be designated as residential or commercial zones, while others may be reserved for industry or recreation. Now, I want you to think of kind of the outskirts of a city that you live in where there are, let's say, a bunch of more industrial type of sites. Well, that area would obviously be zoned for industrial. Or if you see a whole bunch of car dealerships in an area, you notice how they're always kind of clumped together, or farms that are beside each other, right? We don't have a farm, a skyscraper, a house, a farm, a skyscraper, a house. Those are all kind of placed together.
Exactly. Yeah, and one of the notable ones that's done outside of the municipal level is designation of employment lands, which municipalities often have to work within. Um, the benefits of zoning can be that they create a bit more of an organized and cohesive community by establishing clear guidelines for land use and development. They enhance quality of life by separating incompatible activities. So, you don't want, like you said, maybe an aluminum smelting plant right next to your high-rise building, because that would cause complications. For instance, zoning can set distances between industrial plants and residential areas, promoting public health and safety. It also protects the environment by managing development density, encouraging green spaces, and safeguarding important habitats for our fellow Earth inhabitants of animals.
Anyone else on the earth that we need to look out for? um, so the question then is, can zoning be changed? Right? What if I really want that smelting plant right beside my residential high rise? Well, yes, zoning can be changed is the short answer, but it can go through a rigorous process that in some cases requires public feedback and government approval. So the zoning change process has historically and often involved a series of public meetings, consultations with neighborhood groups and stakeholders, and then resulting in a public hearing.
Sounds like the NIMBYs have entered the chat.
Yes, they have. Dan, remind me what a NIMBY is.
NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard.
Okay, so
People who encourage development anywhere but nearby their house.
right.
What they say that it's not in my backyard, but I think it's
Not in my
nowhere.
general area, or
I think there's another one. There's another one that we learned about, which is banana. It's like build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything.
Okay, so we've got NIMBYs and bananas in the chat. But maybe, the days of NIMBYs and bananas stopping development across Canada has come to a close. If the proposed development is not permitted under the existing zoning, the property owner or whatever agent is representing that property owner can go and apply for what's called a zoning amendment. Now, a zoning amendment can legally change either the zoning designation of a property or the zoning regulations within whatever bylaw that property is regulated under. Now, zoning regulations, let's talk about applying them to residential properties, something that we're all quite familiar with on this show. Residential zoning laws control things like the use, the height, and the density of buildings within residential areas. The zoning regulations stipulate that the district's minimum and maximum lot sizes, setbacks, its building height limits, and other important details. So, for example, zoning regulations also dictate the maximum number of units that can be constructed on a property. And homeowners and investors should be and need to be aware of zoning regulations because they will definitely have an influence on the value of that property when it's either up for lease or up for sale or even a possible refinance, depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
For sure. Commercial zoning laws outline the permitted retail establishments, offices, and businesses that can operate within a commercial zone. So, like they can tell you what type of specific business type can operate in there. Sometimes, maybe they don't want a restaurant, or a strip club might be another good example where there's limitations around these kind of things. The regulations impose also beyond that setback requirements, height limits, and the number of parking spots, lot size, building coverage, and design standards for commercial buildings. Parking spots is an interesting one because there are minimum required parking spots for certain things, like a high turnover or high weight use, like a doctor's office as an example would be a good one, where a lot of people waiting around and all of their cars are just sitting in the parking lot during that period of time. Commercial zoning intelligently locates businesses and retail establishments to ensure a compatible and harmonious mix between the different land uses, but also to assess sort of its impact on traffic and how it's going to function with all of the other things. Like typically when you go to if you're an investor and you go to do you want to change the zoning or you want to develop your property, you'll go do what's called a pre-consultation meeting. And at a pre-consultation meeting, you will sit with all of the stakeholders on staff and who basically would be impacted by the change that you're making. So that the people who will be considered kind of in this zoning process would be your fire department, because they need to know, okay, do we have adequate resources to fix this building if it catches on fire? Do we want to change the materials that are built, or do we need, more place to turn around to park the big fire truck or whatever? Traffic is another one. Do we need lights? Do we need to widen the road? Is it going to be is it going to have significant impact on the surrounding, on the road that this building is located on, right? Things like that start to get considered. Water and sewers is another one. Is there enough water and sewers for like allocation and services available for this property based on what the person wants to do with it?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it kind of becomes a combination of something we talk about a lot in real estate, especially real estate investing, which is the highest and best use, right? Zoning really should be a marriage between what that area needs and what that area can support. So just as you said, Dan, right? It's just as important to make sure that there's enough, that safety, like such things like fire can get there and service a lot like that. But at the same time, is that lot best used as a public library or as a restaurant or as a gas station or as a doctor's office? It makes me, it brings back some fond memories, in because I like to think of one of the first projects that we ever worked on together and tried to kind of bring from an investment property to potential redevelopment, and you and I had a lot of fun when we initially looked through that Uxbridge project, and because the zoning essentially was wide open, right? I mean, when we were initially engaging with that project, I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, either operating as like a 5 or a 6-plex kind of thing. It was like a legacy century home on a larger lot in the downtown area of a small town. But when we started looking up what we could potentially put on there, it was a massive list, right? Like literally you could put almost anything on there. And then at that point, it was for us to figure out, okay, well, what does this area of this little town need the most? And what's going to have the best reception from people? And what's going to be that highest and best use from that investor standpoint? And you and I went through a whole laundry list of everything that could be on there. And unfortunately, that project didn't get to where we wanted it to. But that's something that I encourage every investor to go look at is, what can your property be zoned for if you were to go and tear it down or do some kind of larger infill development? Any thoughts on that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even have to be large, right? Like one of the things that, because I typically would encourage beginner investors, and honestly even most like most investors who aren't relatively large entities, like with their own team, let's call it, like an in-house staff of professionals, to take on a large scale development. I mean, we're seeing a ton of people get smoked by the market right now for people who did just that, right? They had raw land, or they bought raw land, and they took it through the entitlement process, and they spent so much money, and now the value on a buildable per square foot basis is declined significantly. But there's these incremental changes that we're seeing almost like on an as of right basis. So as of right, you're able to fourplex pretty much any lot. And we just did our event about this, the Unpacking Multiplexes event, which was awesome, by the way. We had 300 people out, sold like, what was it, 350 tickets or something like that.
Yeah, it was
Everyone
pretty
was really
cool.
happy. The panels were amazing. I learned a lot. I got to meet a lot of people. Yeah, it was really exciting. So stay tuned for the next big in-person event we're going to do.
Yeah, and we'll have a quick kind of debrief discussion about multiplexing and the event at the end of this episode, because essentially that is exactly what this episode is about, is being able to take a single family home or a lot where a single family home existed and being able to drastically change the use case of that property.
Yeah, I guess like you're using the word drastic, and I don't know if I would. Like I'm just thinking like, an increase of 4 units is not that significant, and I think I would encourage people to look at, like, in their acquisition process, and this was a big topic of conversation during the event, was, what lots can we look at that make it really like a slam dunk deal for me to put a fourplex on this. And maybe you're not going to put a fourplex on it today because you don't have the cash to build that or zone that or whatever. Or I guess you don't need zoning because it's as of right. So, but go through the building permit process and tear it down and manage the construction of a 4 unit building or adding all of the units. But you could, in the meantime, cash flow it. Maybe it's a duplex today and you could add 2 units with a large addition. You cash flow it today, and as you build up some revenue, you add those 2 units in a phased approach, or later down the line, maybe after your first mortgage term on a refinance. You'll often hear me say on this, you want to buy a deal that makes money today and makes money tomorrow. I think that if we can find those deals using an understanding of zoning, I would totally encourage investors listening to the show to do that. One of the big piece of it too is like, these are all such new things. So we're by the people who are participating in this, we're like trailblazers in the process of these incremental zoning changes. And if if you create a specialized knowledge and cultivate like a competitive advantage against other investors, and all of the lots better, all of the minor variances better, that zoning element better than anybody else, because there's new ones coming out every day in Toronto. There's major streets now, they're going up to like a certain amount of units on major streets. Cultivate, as an investor, this is an opportunity for you to create a competitive advantage against investors who have been doing this for 20-30 years, because everybody starts on the exact same page, because all of the information is brand new. So that would be one of like my biggest recommendation is for small investors, especially, is understanding this stuff and understanding how to maximize it in the new ways that have just come out is going to be paramount for you to outperform everyone else in the market in the next several decades.